Australia is still in the grip of the devastating disease, avian influenza, or bird flu. The worst this country has yet seen. It's centred on Victoria, where its scale and severity have triggered the state's largest biosecurity response. Under stringent biosecurity on several properties in northeast Victoria, emergency response teams are working to quell this outbreak.
That's why the surveillance at this point is really critical for that early detection, because once we find a new infected property, we can then implement those control measures that are so critical in terms of getting in front of the disease.
Exclusion zones are in place as authorities and the poultry industry scramble to detect, contain and, it's hope, quickly eradicate the disease threat. The latest outbreak, somewhat surprisingly, flared in mid-February near Euroa in the state's northeast. AgVic has set up a mobile testing station at the Euroa showgrounds. Today, Victoria's acting chief vet is checking operations.
They're sending out surveillance teams from this site who are also then bringing samples back. We're able to process those samples here in our mobile laboratory van and package them up and prepare them for shipment down to our AgriBio facility in Melbourne.
It's there that the strain of the virus can be identified. Some strains are more deadly than others. For poultry farmer Brad McAuliffe, this scenario is frighteningly familiar. In May 2024, his staff at a central Victorian poultry farm began to notice sick hens. Scientific testing quickly determined it was avian influenza.
I got the phone call at about 11 o'clock on the Monday night, and then an Agricultural Victoria representative come out first thing on the Tuesday morning and issued a destruction notice for the birds and put the property under quarantine, and you pretty much hand the keys to them and they're in charge.
The egg farm at Meredith, an hour's drive west of Melbourne, was close to other poultry farms. They too came under quarantine immediately as government vets rushed to try and contain the outbreak. Emergency measures included restrictions on the movement of poultry and poultry products, and stringent hygiene methods applied to anything and anyone who'd been near the farms. But the first grisly task was promptly destroying all birds.
Stamping out or eradication by depopulating the affected chickens on a farm. And that is important, not only from the disease point of view, but also from a welfare point of view.
It's hard to describe. It's like everything you've been building for the last 5 or 10 years and someone just drives a truck through it. The tragedy is farmers look after their birds and care for the welfare of their birds. That's their profession. When you have an avian influenza outbreak, you lose the birds.
Between the 22nd of May and the 24th of June, 7 properties in the district tested positive to the H7N3 strain of avian influenza. Just days after, another outbreak was detected at Brad McCall's farm over 100 kilometres away at Terang in southwest Victoria. This time it was a different, more virulent strain called H7N9.
Yeah, we were out of action about 7 months and we had no birds.
At the same time, the disease also flared in other states.
We did have 3 outbreaks occurring simultaneously in Victoria, New South Wales and the ACT. Different strain in New South Wales and the ACT.
Despite the trauma, Brad knew there was only one course of action.
Agricultural Victoria were fantastic to work with, but they come in and they depopulate your birds, they clean your sheds, they remove all your litter, they take anything that could be contagious out of the farm, eggs, packaging, and pretty much clean everything and get it back to a state and hand it back to you once they considered clean.
Of the affected farms, Brad McAuliffe's business was the hardest hit.
It was tens of millions. You know, when you look at it from a financial point of view, if you get a starter pullet, which is a 16-week-old bird, that bird is worth a value of, let's say, $13.50. So if you can add that up, and then obviously the revenue that you have from those birds, including the eggs and that.
Affected farmers are compensated by the government for lost birds, but it only recoups part of their losses.
We lost a total of about 540,000 birds in total, had to be destroyed by the Australian government due to the flu. We had one farm remaining, which was of about 50,000 birds, which is incinerated. The biggest probably hurdle that we had to face is our main operation was based on one of the farms. So our grading facility, everything that we do to obviously get them eggs out to our customers was based on farm and was considered dirty and in quarantine area, which pretty much stopped our business.
It was 7 months before the affected farms were declared disease-free and safe to resume production. Avian influenza or bird flu, the bird disease found globally in many different forms, is unpredictable.
The virus circulates naturally in wild bird populations globally. So in theory, you can have an outbreak anywhere at any time in the world.
It's readily spread across continents by migratory birds. When it comes into contact with high-density poultry farms, the virus can mutate into more deadly strains. These outbreaks have had a dramatic impact on the entire poultry industry, not only egg and broiler farms. Turkeys, ducks, geese, even emu producers can be affected, and consumers have felt the impact too. If you're wondering why there's been an egg shortage in recent months, well, it's a pretty simple equation. Australia has around 20 or 21 million laying birds. This current disease outbreak has seen the forced destruction of around 2.25 million of those, or around 10% of the national flock.
Because we don't import eggs in this country, everything's produced here in Australia. Once you lose 10% of your production, there's a big hole in the market.
Brad McAuliffe is now rebuilding his business with even stricter hygiene and quarantine measures at his poultry sheds. But even that won't guarantee this disease won't strike again.
The farms that had the disease did all the biosecurity requirements and then some. So I don't see that we can do much more. The problem is that this is an endemic form of avian influenza, H7, and so long as the wild birds hold the disease, it's a matter of where they land and what they do.
And that raises an awkward question. Free-range egg production has risen sharply in recent decades, driven by consumers demanding better welfare for hens. But a life outdoors brings much greater risk.
The problem is that the droppings from the birds drop onto the paddock, the birds get it on their feet, it's hard to get all these birds to wipe their feet before they go in the shed, you know, so they take it in with them.
So all of that protection that we do for our birds goes as soon as we let them out of the house. So once they come out of the shed and they're running outside, we lose all control of that. And whether it's a fox bringing a wild bird in or a dead bird in, or a fox dagging one of our birds out and contaminating something else, there's just zero control over a free-range aspect on a farm. A lot of people do a lot of investment in high fencing and everything like that, but short of putting a big dome over your farm to keep the wild birds out, there's no way of protecting the flock at all, and this is just a risk that we're going to be dealing with.
The issue is a source of tension in the industry. Brian Ahmed and his family have produced eggs at Werribee in Melbourne's west for 55 years. He believes free-range farms have become too big, making them susceptible to bird flu.
And it's a numbers game. If you run a small farm with 1,000 birds, you've got a low risk. But if you run a big farm with 100,000 or 200,000 birds out in the open, well, the risk of you attracting a disease is far greater than the small farm. Now, the free-range system, before everyone starts jumping up and down and trying to kill me, there's nothing wrong with it. We've got 3 very good farming systems, free-range, barn and caged. But they are small-scale farming is free-range. It can be managed very well. But we're trying to commoditise a farming system that was not designed for volume production. That's why we developed the cage system. It's how we can produce eggs in volume and make sure our birds are safe and well looked after.
The acting chief vet says more investigation is needed to determine how the virus is spread.
We do need to, as government, industry, community, think about that and look more closely at what some of those factors might be.
I wouldn't like to say one way or the other, because in the last outbreak out of Meredith, there was barn-lay shed had the disease, chicken meat shed had the disease, so it wasn't just free range.
For egg producers, bird flu follows a succession of tough years.
Certainly the last 4, 5, 6 years have been particularly challenging. We did have a significant drought, raising the cost of feed grain in that 2018-19 period. That led us into COVID, which also involved avian influenza in that period. Coming out of COVID, very, very significant input cost spikes, all creating uncertainty and limiting investment. And while we have kept up with egg supply across that period, it's been quite tight. That's delivered us to this moment where we've found that our biosecurity risks, our avian influenza risks, seem to be increasing.
Since 1997, the frequency of bird flu outbreaks has increased. So too has the move to free-range egg production, which nationally now accounts for about 60% of the Australian market. A far more deadly strain of avian influenza, the H5N1 virus, has raged across most of the globe. For the authorities and farmers, it's a frightening prospect.
It's affected every continent in the world except Australia, not only affecting poultry but also a broad range of wild birds but also wild mammals. So we do have to be always expecting the unexpected with these types of diseases.
Victoria plans to end conventional caged egg production by 2036. Brian Ahmed wants state and federal governments to reconsider that move.
The UK banned caged production. They've been hit with AI. The US has been going towards free range. They've been hit 150 million birds culled. The Western world is going towards free range and we're seeing more and more disease. We want food for Australian families. We need to keep our free range farms small, and if we want to produce eggs in volume and make it affordable and have food security, we need the caged farming system.
And you can learn from overseas that these threats, biosecurity threats, have become more frequent and more severe in recent years. And I don't think Australia's immune from that. And we need to stand back and examine it and see what we can learn from the process and what we can do to protect ourselves further.